Good morning, and welcome to the second of two videos on ecology and ecosystems. So, uh, the human biology course is obviously not a course on chemistry. However, as we made very clear at the beginning of the semester, you can't really talk about biology without talking about chemistry as well. And so, in this video, what I'd like to talk about are several of the major biogeochemical cycles that exist in the biosphere and in specific ecosystems as well. Now, by definition, what a biogeochemical cycle is a pathway by which chemicals circulate through an ecosystem. All right. Um, we're talking about water and carbon and phosphorus and nitrogen and some of the others as well. And these chemicals have to circulate through an ecosystem, not just through the living organisms, right? We use these things to build our basic biological molecules, carbs and proteins and DNA and so on. But they also cycle through the non-living components of the ecosystem, the soil, the rock, the water, and that sort of thing. So, there are four major cycles that we'll talk about today in this particular video, and they include the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and the phosphorus cycle. Now, we'll start with where these things can be found in the ecosystem to begin with, and then we'll talk about how they move through the ecosystem itself. Before we do that, there are two definitions that we need to get through. The first is what's called a reservoir. All right. A reservoir is an area such as fossil fuels, minerals in rocks, the sediment in the oceans that contain inorganic compounds, inorganic nutrients. Um, and these are very limited in availability because they're not part of the living cycle. Rocks, the minerals that you find in rocks, are not accessible to living organisms. And so we consider these things to be reservoirs. Now, humans have developed methods of obtaining these things, but most living organisms don't have any ability to mine minerals and that sort of thing out of deep rock. The areas where these nutrients are available for use by living organisms are called exchange pools. And these, of course, are found in the biomes that we talked about in the previous video. We find them in the atmosphere, in the soil, and in the water. And so these are ready sources of these inorganic nutrients. We'll begin today with the cycles by talking about the water cycle. All right, and of course, you are probably well aware that water is everywhere in our environment, including in living organisms. But how does water circulate through the environment? Well, first of all, we find water sitting in great exchange pools called oceans and lakes and ponds and rivers and streams. And water evaporates from those areas as well as from plants, well, land plants specifically, um, and ends up in the atmosphere. In the atmosphere, it gathers together in clouds and then returns to the ground in terms of rainfall, snowfall, and that sort of thing. And when it lands on the ground or even on the surface of an ocean or that sort of thing, it's then returned to the ground. So the water is continuously cycling through the environment. Now, of course, humans have developed methods of removing water from the ground, right? And so the list that's coming up now is a list of human activities that interfere with the water cycle. We are withdrawing water from areas underground called aquifers. All right, this is the water table underneath the soil. If you dig down deep enough under the water, under the surface of the earth, you will find water. And we dig wells and other things that remove water from the aquifers for our own human use. We also clear vegetation from the land. All right, there's the deforestation, especially in South America these days, and in many areas of Asia, is a problem because that water cycle is no longer moving through the trees because there are no trees. We build large structures, houses, basements, driveways, parking lots that prevent percolation of the water down through the soil, right? The water can't travel through the pavement. And it increases runoff. So the water just runs off of the surface and directly into a stream or a pond or that sort of thing. And of course, there's also the problem of pollution. We are constantly polluting our environment with things like sewage and chemicals, and those pollutants very oftentimes will end up in the water around us. So the water cycle, as it operates with non-human interference, looks something like this. All right, you've got water stored in aquifers and in oceans and lakes, but evaporation occurs. There's also sorry about that. There's also transpiration from plants on the land. And they both of those processes lead to precipitation, snow and rain and that sort of thing, whether it falls over the ocean or the land. Now, if the water falls directly back into the ocean, well, of course, it's right back into the exchange pool. However, if it falls back on the terrestrial environments, it may end up as freshwater runoff in streams and rivers, or it may percolate deep into the earth and form an aquifer, which is an area underground that holds a great deal of water. And those aquifers eventually will percolate down into larger bodies of water like lakes and oceans. All right, so you can see with all the blue arrows represented in this picture that there's a great deal of movement of water around. All right, so on a rainy day, all right, although nobody likes rainy days, this is part of the natural cycle of water through the Earth's environment. Okay, the second major cycle that we should talk about here is the carbon cycle. And carbon, of course, is the basis of all organic compounds. And so the movement of carbon throughout our environment is very important for life on Earth. Now, carbon is found mostly in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, and it's exchanged between the atmosphere and living organisms. All right. Plants, of course, take in carbon dioxide and use it during photosynthesis, and you can see that represented here. So, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere taken directly into plants, and plants and other organisms will release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere through respiration. Now, there's also a direct exchange of carbon dioxide into the ocean, where it's used by organisms there, and then released back into the atmosphere by the oceans. Um, and finally, there is, at least in terms of natural occurrences, dead organisms are recycled, and their carbon is released into the atmosphere and into the soil. Now, long dead organisms have developed into fossil fuels, so oil and coal and natural gas. These are all very deep reservoirs of long dead organisms that have turned into fuel. The only thing that's left there is the carbon compounds that make them up: methane and butane and pentane, and the natural gas uh, things. And so we can mine those things, the coal and the oil, and use them in power plants to generate electricity. We refine oil into gasoline to run our automobiles, and so on. So we have taken a very large role in the carbon cycle. Humans have, I mean, by removing these fossil fuels from the earth and using them for our own purposes. Okay, so that is the carbon cycle. Now, in terms of the carbon cycle itself, what do we do that actually interferes with the carbon cycle? Well, of course, as we mentioned, we do a couple of things that can be very harmful to the natural carbon cycle. The first thing that we do is we burn fossil fuels, all right, in our houses, in our cars, all right. Even if you're running on electricity, you're burning fossil fuels. And by the way, one of the myths of the whole electric car movement is that most of the energy produced in this country is produced by burning fossil fuels. So even if you are using an electric car, you're still using fossil fuels because the electric generating plant is burning fossil fuels in order to generate electricity. All right. It is a very huge myth that these electric cars are better for the environment than a gas burning car. Until we develop good technology for producing electricity that doesn't use fossil fuels, electric cars are just as harmful to the environment um, as a gasoline engine car. So other things, including the burning of fossil fuels and the destruction of forests, all right, they deposit carbon dioxide into the atmosphere faster than it's being removed. Um, so because plants are a huge reservoir of I guess we can call them an exchange pool, but plants are a huge holding pen for carbon dioxide. Are they taking the carbon to build their structures? Right? When a plant grows, it's doing so by using the carbon from the atmosphere. Um, and so removing those trees is a harmful thing, as well as burning the trees and the fossil fuels is putting more carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Now, why is this a problem? Well, carbon dioxide and other gases are called greenhouse gases because they trap heat in the atmosphere, and this can contribute to some of the global warming that we see today. All right. So, humans are definitely interfering with the carbon cycle. I don't want to get into the politics of global warming. Is it true? Is it not true? Um, the one thing I will say is that carbon dioxide makes up 0.04% of our atmosphere. Now, changing that level, I mean, it's a very small amount. Changing that level could certainly have an effect on the carbon cycle and the Earth's climate. But as I said in the evolution unit, climate change has been occurring for millions and even billions of years. Should we continue to release these greenhouse gases? Probably not a great idea. But is it going to cause the end of the world as we know it, as certain politicians are saying, in the next 10 years? Probably not. All right. However, we should probably try to find better sources of energy or develop better sources of energy. All right. That's all I'm going to say about the politics of global warming and climate change. So how does this all work? What is this greenhouse gas thing all about? Well, generally speaking, it all starts with the sun. It always starts with the sun. And so light and heat from the sun reach the surface of the earth. It passes through the earth's atmosphere and warms the surface of the earth. All right. That heat and some of the light is reflected back off of the surface of the earth and ends up in hitting the clouds. Now, the clouds contain water vapor, and they can absorb some of the heat and then rewarm the Earth's surface by a downward re-radiation. And you can see that in the second portion of the diagram here. You can see some of the heat being directed back toward the Earth as opposed to being reflected back out of the atmosphere. Now, if we increase the level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, then, damn it, then a smaller portion of the heat will be reflected and more end up being re-radiated. And so this can lead to a warming of the Earth. So greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide, cause the atmosphere to absorb and re-radiate infrared rays. And this can increase the temperature of the Earth. Okay, the next one, the nitrogen cycle. All right, this is the third of the three major inorganic nutrient cycles. Interestingly enough, whereas carbon dioxide or carbon is a very small portion of the Earth's atmospheric gases, nitrogen in several forms is the biggest component of the Earth's atmosphere. Most of the air that you breathe in is nitrogen gas or some form of nitrogen gas. But it, generally speaking, is not in a usable form by either plants or animals for that matter. And so, in order for plants to use nitrogen to build their own building blocks, DNA and proteins and that sort of thing, they require a symbiotic relationship with certain bacteria called nitrogen fixing bacteria. And what these things do, what these bacteria do, is they convert nitrogen gas, pure nitrogen gas, into a chemical called ammonium, which is a combination of nitrogen and some hydrogens. And ammonium is usable by plants as a building block for their nutrients. There are also bacteria called nitrifying bacteria. And these then convert the ammonium into a form called nitrate, all right, which is again used by plants. All right, so two kinds of bacteria: the nitrogen fixing and the nitrifying bacteria. All right, are used to change the form of nitrogen found in the atmosphere and in the soil. And then finally, there's another kind of bacteria that's called takes the nitrate and converts it back into nitrogen gas and emits it into the atmosphere through a process called denitrification. All right, and so the cycle is there. All right, now. In the next slide, I will show you how this works as well. All right. So three different, mostly the big takeaway message here is that the nitrogen cycle on Earth is dependent upon several kinds of bacteria that can convert nitrogen from one form to another. All right. And without it, the other forms of life, including plants and animals, would not be able to exist. Okay, so what does the nitrogen cycle actually look like? Well, here it is. You've got nitrogen gas in the atmosphere, and we start this whole process by nitrogen fixation. And again, this is done by bacteria. So the nitrogen fixing bacteria in nodules of plants and in the soil. Then convert the nitrogen into ammonium that you see down here, NH4. Then nitrifying bacteria convert that into nitrate, which you see here. So this is ammonium here. This is nitrate. Actually, this is nitrite, and this is nitrate. And then that can be then used by plants. There are also denitrifying bacteria, which then take the nitrate and release the nitrogen back up into the atmosphere. This process can occur in the oceans as well. So you can see that over here amongst the living organisms here, including decomposers and the plants and the fish and whatever else is living in the waters. Um, and so these, you can see that the process is rather complex. But we again run from nitrogen gas to ammonium to nitrite to nitrate, and then back to nitrogen gas. All right. Okay. So, in terms of the nitrogen cycle, of course, human beings can interfere with this natural um, process as well. And we do this in several different ways. All right. The most the biggest way that we interfere is we actually use nitrogen based fertilizers and we add them to the soil, especially in our farmlands, in order to grow bigger and better crops to feed other humans. All right. And these nitrogen based fertilizers oftentimes will simply run off of the farmer's field into streams and rivers and lakes. And this causes problems because it causes what we call eutrophication. Um, and what this is a process by which there's so much extra nitrate in the water that plant forms, algae and other plants, grow so quickly that they actually kill off the animals that live in these aquatic environments. All right. So fertilizers cause the plants in the water to grow, but too many plants actually kills off the fish and the other animals. We also release nitrogen oxide back into the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels, all right, along with some other things. Um, but what this can do is then add or combine with the water in the atmosphere, and it essentially acidifies the water vapor. And so when the water falls back to the earth, it falls as what we refer to as acid rain. All right, so nitrogen oxides and sulfur dioxides will form an acidic rain uh, that falls down to the earth. This can lead to problems for, especially in the freshwater lakes and rivers. Not that long ago, acid rain was a huge concern in the Adirondacks. As a matter of fact, I take my kids camping in the Adirondacks every summer, and we stay on this little pond, and there are no fish in the pond. All right, and there's no plant life in the pond, and the reason is that the water in the pond is acidic to the point where plants and animals can't grow. And so this is again another method or another way that we interfere with the nitrogen cycle and can cause damage to the environment. All right. So the burning of fossil fuels puts nitrogen oxides and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere where they combine with water vapor to form acids that return to Earth as deposition. All right. This results in nitrogen oxides and hydrocarbons that react with one another to produce smog and other things. Okay. Next on our list is the phosphorus cycle. And of course, that phosphorus is very important in the production of DNA inside individual organisms. And it's also part of some amino acids. But phosphate ions, which is a phosphate and four oxygen atoms, become available to living organisms by the slow weathering of rocks. And so, as rain falls on a mountain range, uh, slowly but surely, small pieces and parts of the rock become released, and those phosphate ions then become available to living organisms. Um, and of course, phosphate is a limiting nutrient in most ecosystems because it's required for the growth of organisms. You have to have phosphates in order to build DNA molecules and other things. So, um, you can see the phosphorus cycle represented in the diagram below. And sediments and rock become mineable. Um, but they're also then weathered by natural occurrences like rain and snow and runoff. That adds free phosphates to the soil, and those phosphates can be used by plants to grow. Um, the plants, of course, then are eaten by animals, and then the waste products end up back in the soil, where they're broken down by decomposers. However, when we use fertilizers on our crops, right, a lot of that phosphate can then run off into freshwater lakes and our oceans, and that will put a lot of the phosphate into solution. In other words, mixed up inside the water, and so this all adds to um, phosphate in the environment. Now, how do we interfere with the phosphorus cycle, just like with the other cycles as well? Um, the biggest uh, component of this, of course, in terms of human activity, is farming. All right, we use phosphate just like we do with nitrogen. We use phosphate in our fertilizers because plants grow better with a good bit of phosphate. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that you use for fertilizing your crops runs off of the land and ends up in our waterways. And so, um, when this happens, as well as discharge from sewer systems, can result in what we talked about earlier with the nitrogen cycle in eutrophication. And this is again where there's so much phosphorus in the waterways that plants grow out of control, and this can lead to an unbalanced ecosystem. The animals die out. And so the sources of phosphorus pollution here um, comes from um, the fertilization, as well as from a few other things as well. Anyway, so sources of pollution include point sources where you have a specific source, like a sewage plant or uh, some kind of factory. And then we have non-point sources, which includes runoff from the land. And this, of course, is mostly from farmers fertilizing their fields. Right? So that, my friends, is the phosphorus cycle. Last but not least, let's talk about some sources of pollution that can interfere with our natural environment and the ecosystems that surround us. Um, so, sources of water pollution, specifically, that can lead to eutrophication in terms of our ponds and lakes. We produce oxygen demanding wastes. Like biodegradable organic compounds, sewage, um, food processing plants, paper mills, and that sort of thing. Uh, Plant nutrients that we spread on our crops, like nitrates and phosphates from fertilizers and sewage treatment plants. Detergents actually add a good bit of this to our environment. Sediments and thermal discharges are also end up uh, changing our waters. The hazards to this include the disease-causing agents.
It's 12 o'clock.
Thank you, Jesus. The bacteria and viruses from sewage and barnyard wastes, farmlands, in other words, um, can lead to bacteria growth in terms of cholera, food poisoning, and hepatitis, believe it or not. Um, we use synthetic organic compounds to kill bugs. Um, we use inorganic chemicals and minerals and release them into the environment from mines and factories. Um, and radiation from research facilities, medical facilities. It says nuclear power plants here, but generally speaking, unless there's a major meltdown, nuclear power plants there's less radiation in a nuclear power plant than there is anywhere else on Earth. All right. The radiation is actually contained inside of a power plant, as opposed to when you're just walking down the street, you're exposed to a lot more radiation from the earth and from the sun and from just the environment around you. But that's a whole different story. Anyway, so these are some of the major sources of pollution. That brings us to the end of the second of two videos on ecosystems and the biogeochemical cycles. Um, and I hope you learned something.